Hey there, wanderers of the human wild. It's late, isn't it? Maybe you're watching this at midnight, curled up with a blanket, or maybe it's the crack of dawn and you're sipping coffee, staring out at a world that feels a little too loud, a little too fast. Wherever you are, dim the lights, turn down your screen brightness just a touch, and let the modern world slip away for a while. Because tonight, we're not here to scroll or rush or check notifications. We're going somewhere older, way older, than cities, than clocks, than the very idea of history. We're stepping back 12,000 years to a time before the first cities rose, before the first walls were built, before we started measuring time like it was something we could own. This is a story about what it meant to be human when the world was wild, when firelight was our only screen, and when survival wasn't just about living. It was about belonging, about knowing, about feeling the pulse of the earth beneath your bare feet. Imagine waking up before the sun does. Not because your alarm is screaming or because you've got a meeting to dread, but because the fire beside you has burned down to embers, and the morning chill is creeping in. You stretch inside a shelter made of bent willow branches and stretched animal hides, the walls trembling slightly with the wind. The air smells of ash, of leather, of the faint musk of the earth waking up. There's no coffee maker humming, no traffic in the distance, just the soft calls of cranes over a nearby lake and the rustle of reeds. This isn't a weekend camping trip. This is your life, and it's been the life of your ancestors for tens of thousands of years. You're in the Paleolithic around 10,000 BCE, in a world without cities, without roads, without empires or taxes or Wi-Fi. The only architecture is the glow of the fire and the stories etched in your memory. And yet, across what we now call the Levant, Eastern Africa, Europe, and Asia, small bands of humans, your ancestors, my ancestors, are stirring beside their hearths, speaking a language of smoke, kin, and survival. These aren't the cavemen you saw in cartoons, grunting and dragging clubs. Forget that image. Caves were rare, more like emergency shelters or sacred spaces than homes. Most people lived in open-air camps, in shelters woven from branches or built from mammoth bones, moving with the seasons, following the herds, the plants, the water. They carried everything they needed. Stone tools sharp enough to slice through hide, baskets stitched with gut, spears bound with sinew, dried roots, and the dreams that kept them going. The world was wild, but it wasn't chaos. It was deeply known, mapped not with paper but with footsteps, with songs, with the way a certain tree bloomed after the first rain. Let's walk into one of those mornings, somewhere on the northern shore of a lake we now call Ohelo II, in modern-day Israel. To the people who lived here 23,000 years ago, it's just the place of water, reeds, birds, and fish. You wake to the cries of cranes slicing through the dawn. Your shelter is a low, dome-shaped hut made of branches and thatch, sturdy but temporary, built to move when the season shifts. Inside, the space is organized with a kind of quiet precision. Grinding stones in one corner, a fire pit in the center with ash swept neatly to the side, sleeping mats woven from grass. Nearby, there are bones, gazelle, wild boar, stacked from last night's meal. The fire still glows, embers carefully buried under ash to keep it alive through the night. Making fire from scratch is hard. Keeping it alive is a skill, a kind of intimacy with the world. Fire isn't just heat or a way to cook. It's the heart of everything. Where there's fire, there's life. Where there's smoke, there's safety. You kneel, feed the embers with dry twigs, and watch the flames flicker back to life, casting shadows on the walls of your shelter. This is how your day begins, not with a to-do list, but with a rhythm as old as your bones. Step outside and the world is waking up too. The lake glitters under the bruised blue sky, and the air is alive with the hum of insects. Your band, maybe 20 or 30 people, your kin, your extended family, starts to stir. Someone's sharpening a flint blade, the soft chip-chip blending with the morning sounds. A child is playing with a stick, mimicking the way you gutted a fish yesterday. An elder is sorting dried roots, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that comes from decades of practice. There's no rush, no deadline, but there's purpose. Everyone knows their role not because it's assigned, but because it's learned, absorbed through years of watching and doing. The youngest stay near the camp, tending the fire or weaving grass into cords. The older kids, maybe teenagers, are already out foraging, their eyes scanning for wild barley or the first berries of the season. They know which plants sprout after rain, which roots need roasting to be safe, which leaves can soothe a cut. They're not just kids, they're botanists, trackers, keepers of a knowledge so vast it makes our modern brains look a little lazy. This knowledge isn't written down. There are no books, no apps,
No Wikipedia.
It lives in the group, in the stories told around the fire, in the way your mother showed you how to twist sinew into thread, or how your uncle taught you to read a hoofprint in the mud. It's a kind of intelligence we've almost forgotten, one that doesn't need a degree to prove itself. These people aren't less smart than us, they're us, just barefoot, fire-lit, and unburdened by the weight of asphalt and screens. Their brains are our brains, wired for memory, cooperation, and survival on a scale most of us couldn't handle. Imagine knowing the exact shape of a leaf that could save your life, or the smell of rain before it falls, or the way a deer's gait changes when it's wounded. That's not instinct, that's expertise, honed over generations, passed down not in classrooms but in the quiet moments of living. Let's move north now to a colder world, near what's now the Czech Republic, at a place called Dolní Věstonice, 30,000 years ago. The air here bites, the edge of an ice age still lingering. The shelters are different, more robust, built from mammoth bones insulated with clay, furs and turf. These people hunt reindeer and mammoth, their lives tied to the great herds that roam the steppes. But they're not just hunters, they're artists. In their hearths, they've fired some of the earliest clay figurines in the world's small, abstract, often female shapes. We don't know exactly what they meant. Were they offerings? Symbols of fertility? Memories of someone lost? What we do know is that they were made with care, shaped deliberately, sometimes placed in the fire to harden or even explode in the heat. This isn't a world of thoughtless survival. It's a world where meaning is crafted, where art lives beside the fire, where the act of creating is as vital as the act of eating. Daily life here follows the sun and the seasons. The oldest and youngest stay near the camp, keeping the fire alive, drying fish, repairing nets. Others head out in small groups, foraging for nuts, tubers, or wild grains. They walk barefoot, but their minds carry a map, not of roads, but of relationships between plants, rivers, birds, and time. They know which berries ripen first, which roots need boiling twice, which mushrooms grow only where lightning struck. This isn't guesswork. It's science, lived and breathed. The hunters, usually the younger adults, track game, maybe gazelle or boar, reading signs in the landscape, a broken twig, a faint whiff of urine on the wind. Their tools are simple but precise, microliths, tiny stone blades set into wooden shafts like barbed teeth, or spear throwers called atlatls that amplify force and distance. Hunting isn't a daily win. Most meals come from plants, not meat, but when a hunt succeeds, it feeds everyone. The whole band shares the bounty, gathered around the fire. No plates, no hierarchy, just hands passing food, voices weaving stories. Midday is for mending, sharpening tools, drying meat, fixing nets. Children watch, learning by mimicry, asking endless questions. There's no school, but education is constant. A kid might hold a flint, try to nap it, and fail a dozen times before the elder next to them nudges their hand just so. They learn which bark peels easily, which ants can bite through bone, which stars mark the turn of seasons. Not as facts, but as stories, as rhythms. This is a world without writing, but not without history. Memory is the group's sacred library, and everyone adds to it. A grandmother's tale of a flood, a father's song about a hunt, a child's question about the moon. They all weave into the fabric of who you are, who your people are. Now, as the sun dips low, the rhythm shifts. The work of the day gives way to the work of the night. You're back by the fire, the flames casting shadows that dance like animals, like ancestors. The air smells of smoke and roasted roots, and the group gathers close. Someone taps a stick against a stone, setting a rhythm. Someone starts to hum, a low melody that pulls everyone in. This is the Paleolithic cathedral, the circle around the flame. At places like Dolny Vestinus, archaeologists have found flutes carved from bird bones, their whole space to play notes that fit modern musical scales. These people made music not for fame or profit, but for presence, for connection. They danced, mimicking animals, swaying to the beat of a drum made from stretched hide. They told stories, not novels with neat endings, but layered myths about the stars, the spirits, the ancestors. Maybe they used plants to enter trance states, to speak with the unseen. Whatever they believed, they lived it together, under the open sky, the fire their only light. This is what I want you to carry with you as we move deeper into their world. You're not just sitting by a fire, you're part of a system, a web of relationships between people, plants, animals, and the land itself. The world was wild, but it wasn't chaos. It was deeply known, mapped with footsteps, songs, and the way a certain tree bloomed after the first rain. Picture yourself standing on a grassy plain now, the wind carrying the scent of wild herbs and distant rain. The sun's climbing, and your band is already moving. Some are heading out to forage, their eyes scanning for the first signs of wild barley or the glint of berries hidden in the brush. Others are checking their tools, running their fingers along the edges of flint blades, testing the balance of a spear. You're not in a hurry, but you're not idle either. Every action has purpose, not because someone's watching, but because this is how you live. This is the Paleolithic. And life here isn't random. It's precise, deliberate, and so deeply known it's like the land is singing its secrets to you, and you know every note. The land isn't just a backdrop. It's the foundation of everything. These people, your ancestors, didn't see the world as something to conquer or own. They saw it as a conversation. They knew which berries ripened first after the snow melted, which tubers needed boiling twice to lose their bitterness, which birds sang before a storm. This wasn't trivia, it was survival, woven into their bodies through years of watching, tasting, listening. At Ohelo 2, archaeologists found traces of over 100 plant species: wild wheat, barley, figs, acorns, some charred from cooking, others stored for later. These weren't people stumbling through the wilderness, hoping to get lucky. They were managing the landscape with intention, harvesting before seeds dropped, gathering before rot set in. Some anthropologists call this proto-agriculture, not farming, but a kind of tending, encouraging the growth of useful plants by selective gathering, maybe even burning patches of land to promote new sprouts. In Australia, Aboriginal people used fire to shape entire ecosystems for tens of thousands of years, a practice called firestick farming. It wasn't about dominating the land, it was about dancing with it, knowing its rhythms so well you could nudge it into abundance. This knowledge wasn't just about plants. It extended to animals, to weather, to the very pulse of the earth. Hunters could read a broken twig or a faint hoofprint in the mud and know not just what animal passed by, but how fast it was moving, whether it was injured, whether it was alone. They could smell rain before it fell, feel a shift in air pressure that meant clouds were coming. Their weapons, microliths set into spears, atlatls that extended the reach of a throw, were simple but sophisticated, designed with an understanding of force, balance, and material. At Schöningen in Germany 400,000 years ago, humans left behind wooden spears, carefully shaped and fire-hardened, used to hunt horses in planned ambushes. This wasn't random violence, it was choreography, a group effort that required timing, teamwork, and an intimate knowledge of animal behavior. They knew where the herds drank, how they moved when startled, which paths they took to escape. This was science, not guesswork, and it was passed down through stories, through watching, through doing. Their intelligence was embodied, practical, holistic. They didn't need spreadsheets to track seasonal changes or apps to remind them when berries ripened. Their brains were wired for memory, for pattern recognition, for cooperation on a level we can barely imagine. Imagine knowing the exact shape of a leaf that could stop a fever, or the call of a bird that meant a predator was near. Imagine remembering the path to a river you last saw 3 winters ago, or the smell of a plant that only grows where lightning strikes. This wasn't just knowledge, it was devotion, an inheritance carried in the body, passed from hand to hand, mouth to ear, season to season. They had time to rest, to play, to create. Anthropologists studying modern forager societies, like the Hadza in Tanzania or the Kung in the Kalahari, found that people spent about 20 to 30 hours a week on subsistence, hunting, gathering, making tools. That's 4 or 5 hours a day tops. The rest was for socializing, storytelling, repairing, or just sitting by the fire, watching the flames. Compare that to our 40-hour work weeks, our side hustles, our endless emails. Their work was hard, but it was meaningful, tied to the land and the group. When the sun got hot, they paused. When food was plentiful, they preserved it. When it was scarce, they moved. There was no artificial urgency, no notifications pulling them away from the moment. They lived in rhythm, not in a race. That rhythm followed the sun, the seasons, the needs of the group. In the morning, the camp hummed with quiet activity. Elders sorting roots, kids weaving grass, hunters checking their spears. By midday, the foragers were back with baskets of greens, maybe a few fish from the lake. The hunters might return empty-handed, or they might bring a gazelle, its meat shared among everyone. There was no dinner table, no silverware, but there was food, passed hand to hand, eaten together. And always, there was the fire, the center of it all, its glow tying the group together. As the sky darkened, the rhythm shifted again. The work of the day gave way to the work of the night. Storytelling, music, connection. Someone might hum, another might tap a rhythm on a stone. A child might ask why the stars move, and an elder would answer with a story, not a lecture. This wasn't just downtime. It was the glue that held the group together, the archive of their history, their identity. That archive lived in their bodies, not in books. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, 75,000 years ago, humans etched geometric patterns onto pieces of ochre crosshatches, lines meeting lines in deliberate order. They drilled holes in shells to make beads, not for decoration but for meaning, for sharing, for marking something sacred. These weren't random marks, they were symbols, proof that these people were thinking abstractly, maybe even spiritually. They were transforming the world into meaning, long before writing, long before temples. And that meaning wasn't individual, it was collective. Everyone contributed to the story, to the memory, to the firelit circle where the group became more than a band of survivors. It became a culture. Now, let's dive deeper into that culture, into the tools that shaped their world. You're crouching by the hearth. The fire's glow painting your face in soft oranges and shadows. You're holding a spear, its tip a microlith, a tiny, razor-sharp blade of flint set into a wooden shaft. It's light, balanced, deadly. This isn't just a tool. It's a marvel, a piece of engineering born from generations of trial and error, observation and memory. You know how it was made because you watched your uncle shape one last summer, his hands guiding yours as you learned to strike the stone just right. You know how to use it because you've practiced, missed, failed, and tried again. This spear isn't just for hunting. It's a story, a connection to the people who came before you, to the animals you'll track, to the land that gives you everything. These tools weren't crude. The Levallois technique, used across Africa, Europe, and Asia over 200,000 years ago, is a way of preparing a stone core to strike off a single flake of a specific shape. Think of it like sculpting a tool in your mind before it exists. You have to understand the stone's grain, its fracture lines, the way force travels through it. This is tactile calculus, a kind of geometry you feel in your hands. By the Upper Paleolithic, around 25,000 years ago, they were making microliths, tiny blades sometimes just a centimeter long, set into spears, arrows, or knives. These were modular tools designed to be repaired, upgraded, adapted. Katenda, in what's now the Democratic Republic of Congo, 90,000 years ago, people carved bone harpoons with barbs perfectly suited for fishing large catfish. They knew the behavior of the fish, the depth of the water, the strength of the current. At Skaaningen, 400,000 years ago, wooden javelins were fire-hardened, balanced like modern ones, used to hunt horses in planned ambushes. This wasn't random. It was choreography, requiring timing, teamwork, and an intimate knowledge of animal behavior. But tools were only part of it. The Paleolithic mind saw beyond the next meal. At Blombo's cave, 75,000 years ago, humans etched crosshatch patterns onto ochre, drilled holes in shells to make beads. At Dalny Vestinus, 30,000 years ago, they shaped clay into figurines, fired them in hearths, sometimes letting them explode in the heat. And then there's the cave art, Chauvet, Lascaux, Sulawesi, where the walls come alive with lions, bison, horses, painted with shading, perspective, motion. At Chauvet, 30,000 years ago, a lion seems to leap from the stone. At Lascaux, 17,000 years ago, a great black bull towers over you. These weren't doodles, they were cinematic, ritualistic, sacred. Why paint deep in a cave, crawling through narrow passages with only a flickering lamp? Some say these caves were temples, places to meet the spirits or ancestors. The torchlight made the animals move, a kind of prehistoric cinema. Others think the act of painting was the ritual itself, a way of becoming the animal, of asking its permission to take its life. The paintings weren't about conquest, they were about connection, about weaving humans into the greater story of the world. This connection extended to how they lived together. The Paleolithic wasn't a world of lone heroes. It was a world of groups, of shared purpose. Everyone had a role, but those roles weren't rigid. Women knew which plants healed, which poisoned, which could be woven into thread. Men foraged, crafted, taught. Children learned by doing, not by sitting in a classroom. At sites like El Sidrón in Spain 49,000 years ago, dental calculus shows traces of yarrow and chamomile, not food but medicine. At Bonda Cave in South Africa, 44,000 years ago, a stone blade carried traces of poison made from castor beans, a kind of prehistoric chemistry. This wasn't random, it was science, passed down through generations of trial, error, and storytelling. And that storytelling was key. Around the fire, knowledge wasn't hoarded, it was shared. You taught your sister how to shape a flint point, corrected your cousin's grip on a spear, showed a child how to weave grass. Learning wasn't a task, it was life. Modern foragers like the Hadza show us how this worked. Women can identify hundreds of edible plants, recalling specific trees across miles of land. Their spatial memory is staggering, and it matches what we see in the archaeological record. These people carried maps in their heads, songs in their throats, stories in their hands. Their intelligence wasn't specialized. It was integrated, weaving together botany, zoology, meteorology, and psychology into a single living whole. Now, let's sink into the heart of their communities. You're by the hearth again, the flames painting your face, the night pressing close. Around you, your band, maybe 25 people, is settling in. A child is shaping mud into little figures, mimicking the animals you saw today. An elder is humming, her fingers twisting grass into chord. Someone's laughing, a warm sound over the crackle of the fire. There's no house to lock, no bills to pay, but there's safety, not from solitude but from togetherness. You're surrounded by people who know your every scar, who'll notice if you're quiet tonight. This is what it means to be human in the Paleolithic, to belong deeply to a group that's more than a family. It's a living archive, a circle of memory and care. Community wasn't just a nice idea, it was survival. You didn't live as an individual, chasing your own goals. You lived as part of a band, small enough to know everyone but strong enough to face the world together. Everyone had a role, but those roles weren't hierarchical. Hunters might track game one day, then help weave baskets the next. Gatherers knew the land's secrets and shared them freely. Children weren't shuttled off. They were part of the action, watching, mimicking, learning. Elders weren't sent away. They were the keepers of the group's history, their stories a map for survival. Parenting was communal, what anthropologists call alloparenting. Everyone helped raise the kids, mothers, fathers, siblings, aunts, grandparents, even unrelated friends. When a baby cried, it was the group's concern. When a child learned to throw a stone, the whole camp felt the pride. Modern foragers like the Hadza show us this. Babies are carried skin to skin, toddlers wander but are always watched, and by age 5, kids are foraging, learning plant names, tracking skills. Education was constant, woven into every moment. At Paleolithic sites, we find small tools with uneven marks, scrapers, beads, that suggest young hands, still learning. A child might try to nap a flint, fail, try again, guided by an elder's nudge. They'd learn which bark peels easily, which stars mark the seasons, not as facts, but as stories. The elderly were libraries, carrying songs, survival tips, memories of floods or hunts. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq 40,000 years ago, a Neanderthal man with a crushed skull and withered arm lived for years, cared for by his group. These people didn't abandon their weak, they adapted. Knowledge wasn't owned. It was shared, passed like a flame from one hearth to the next. As the sun sinks, the fire becomes a cathedral. Someone plays a flute, its notes floating over the coals. Someone dances, their shadow mimicking a deer. Someone tells a story, a myth about the stars, a warning about a predator, a memory of a grandmother who knew the best fishing spots. These weren't just stories, they were survival, binding the group, teaching the young, honoring the old. The fire was where they processed fears, joys, losses. A hunter might come back empty-handed, but his story of the deer that got away would make the group laugh, easing the sting. A child might cry, and someone would hum, soothing them with a melody older than any lullaby. The fire heard confessions, held space for grief, absorbed the day's tensions. It was therapy, not clinical but human. Modern neuroscience shows that storytelling and music around a fire release oxytocin, lower cortisol. The fire was a prehistoric therapy session, calming the emotional brain, making the dark feel safe. Now, let's linger in that firelight, because the night wasn't just for stories. It was for music, for rituals, for becoming human. You're sitting by the hearth, the flames flickering, casting shadows that dance like spirits. The night is deep, filled with the rustle of leaves and a wolf's distant howl. Your band is close, children in laps, elders leaning forward, hunters sharpening tools. Someone's humming, a melody blending with the fire's crackle. Another taps a stick against a stone, setting a rhythm. This isn't just a campfire. It's a sanctuary, where the day's work gives way to something deeper. Connection, meaning. The night isn't an interruption. It's the soul of your world, where the group becomes a culture, a story that stretches beyond the horizon. The fire is more than warmth. It's a presence, a magic that holds the group together. At Blombos Cave 75,000 years ago, humans processed ochre by firelight, grinding red pigment that might have painted bodies or marked sacred objects. At Dalny Vestinus, they fired clay figurines, some exploding in the heat, maybe as offerings. The fire was their archive, their altar, their stage. It wasn't just about cooking. It was about belonging, about turning the dark into a space where the group could dream together. Stories carried knowledge about predators, plants, migrations, and morals, passed mouth to mouth, night to night. They were tapestries, layered with myth, warning, humor, wonder. A story about a fox might teach you how to track it, but also how to think like it, cunning, quick. A tale about the stars might mark the seasons, but also remind you of your place in the cosmos. The firelight made it real, the shadows dancing like ancestors, like gods. Music was part of that rhythm. At Hohlfels in Germany, 40,000 years ago, humans carved flutes from vulture bone, their whole space to play notes that fit modern scales. They played drums, likely stretched hides, and maybe struck rocks that rang like bells. The night had a soundtrack, and it was ritual, therapy, communication. In modern hunter-gatherer groups like the San, dances around the fire are healing ceremonies, using rhythm to enter trance states, to connect with the spirit world. Imagine your ancestors, swaying under the stars, faces painted with ochre, bodies moving to a beat that echoed in their bones. The fire was where they processed the day's fears, turned grief into narrative, made the unbearable bearable. It was their sun on earth, connecting them to the cosmos. Some sites show bones with notches that might track lunar cycles, others with tally marks aligned with solstices. They watched the sky, lived in sync with its cycles, the fire their center, their first temple. Now, let's meet another presence by that fire. There's a dog, curled near the hearth, its eyes glinting in the glow. It's not a pet, no leash, no collar. It's a companion, drawn by the warmth of your fire, the scraps of your meals. This is 10,000 BCE, and the story of humans and dogs is already unfolding, not through domination but through mutual trust. It started tens of thousands of years ago, when curious wolves lingered near camps, drawn by meat and fire. The boldest, least aggressive stayed closest, surviving on scraps, offering their noses, their barks. At Bonn-Oberkassel in Germany, 14,000 years ago, a human and a dog were buried side by side. The dog nursed through illness, fed, cared for. This wasn't a tool. It was a companion, loved, mourned. Dogs ate what humans ate, meat, marrow, grains, their stomachs adapting, diverging from wolves. This was coevolution, a biochemical bond, oxytocin flowing when their eyes met yours. You're on a hunt now, tracking a deer through tall grass. The dog is with you, its nose low, ears pricked. It catches a scent, darts ahead, flushes the deer toward you. Your spear finds its mark, and tonight, the band eats. The dog gets its share, gnawing a bone by the fire. It's a scout, a guard, a playmate for the kids, teaching them to read glances, tilts of the head. At Paleolithic sites, dog burials show care, curled in sleeping positions, sometimes with grave goods. This wasn't ownership, it was love, a relationship of choice. Dogs sharpened our empathy, our ability to read emotions without words. They guarded the camp, made migrations less lonely, helped us become more human. Now, let's turn to the animals that weren't companions but gods. You're standing at the mouth of a cave, a flickering lamp in your hand, its flame casting shadows on damp stone. You crawl through a narrow passage to a chamber where the walls come alive. Lions leap, bison charge, horses gallop. This is Chauvet 30,000 years ago, or Lascaux 17,000 years ago, or Sulawesi 40,000 years ago. These are the cathedrals of the Paleolithic, where humans didn't just paint animals. They honored them, summoned them, became them. The paintings are vivid, shaded with ochre and charcoal, drawn with perspective and motion. At Chauvet, a lion's eyes follow you. At Lascaux, a great black bull looms. In Sulawesi, human-animal hybrids dance in a mythic hunt. These aren't portraits, they're symbolic, ritualistic. Why paint deep in a cave, risking your life? Some say these were temples, the torchlight making the animals move, a prehistoric cinema. Others think painting was the ritual, a way of entering the animal's essence, honoring its spirit. In modern hunter-gatherer cultures, animals are kin, their spirits revered. The Paleolithic mind might have been animistic, seeing life in everything: rocks, rivers, wind. To paint a bison was to commune with it, to weave it into the group story. These animals weren't random, they were the ones hunted, the ones that fed the group. But they're rarely shown wounded, instead majestic, divine. At Lascaux, a rare human figure, bird-headed, stands beside a wounded bison, as if part of the same spiritual world. In Trois cave, the sorcerer has antlers, a wolf's tail, human limbs, a shaman merging with the animal spirit. This was transformation, not conquest, blurring the line between human and beast. The cave was a temple, the act of painting a prayer. At Dolny Vestinus, they shaped clay figurines, fired them until they burst. At Sungur in Russia, they carved thousands of ivory beads for the dead. This was art as ritual, as connection, as a way of saying, we're here, and the world matters. Now, let's step out of the caves and onto a ridge in southeastern Anatolia. You're standing on a hill, the wind sharp, the Taurus Mountains looming. Below, the plain is dotted with gazelle and wild grasses. It's 12,000 years ago, and massive T-shaped pillars rise from the earth, carved with foxes, snakes, vultures. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it's not supposed to exist. No wheels, no metal tools. Yet these nomads moved tons of stone, planned enclosures with mathematical precision, built a sanctuary. The pillars, some 16 feet tall, stand like humans or gods, carved with animals that might be guides, tricksters, messengers. There are no homes here, no hearths, just a ceremonial site for people on the move. Animal bones show communal feasts, meat shared, stories told. Some say it was a calendar tracking solstices. Others see it as a place of burial, initiation, healing. It was a gathering place, a space for meaning, not survival. Göbekli Tepe flips our understanding of history. We thought agriculture led to cities, cities to temples. But here, the temple came first. The need to gather, to ritualize might have driven people to stay, to plant seeds, to settle. And then, they buried it, deliberately, with limestone rubble and bones, an act of reverence or closure. Maybe it marked the end of a cycle. As the climate shifted, animals grew scarcer, the old ways faded. The foxes and vultures on those pillars might have been symbols of a world slipping away. By burying it, they preserved it, a time capsule for us to find 12,000 years later. Now, let's follow that shift. You're by a river, the sun warm, the air heavy with wild grasses. Your band has returned to this spot for years, where barley grows thick and gazelle drink. But this time, you're not moving on. The seeds you dropped last season have sprouted. You're tending them, clearing weeds, scattering more. Your shelters are sturdier, made of mud brick. There's grain stored in a pit, a hedge against hunger. This is the dawn of the Neolithic, around 10,000 BCE, and you're not just living with the land, you're shaping it, claiming it, staying. At Jericho, 9,000 years ago, a stone wall and tower rise, a statement. This place is ours. At Catalhoyuk, 8,000 years ago, homes are packed tightly, their walls painted with bull skulls. This isn't just shelter, it's a new mindset, where permanence becomes a virtue, where the land is a possession. But this wasn't progress, it was a trade-off. In the Paleolithic, your ancestors ate a varied diet: tubers, fish, nuts, berries. Their bones show they were lean, strong, with low disease rates. They worked 20 to 30 hours a week, leaving time for rest, stories, connection. Farming meant longer hours, repetitive tasks: sowing, weeding, grinding grain. Neolithic skeletons show arthritis, cavities, malnutrition. Food was more secure, but nutrition poorer. Walls like Jericho's weren't just architecture, they were a mindset. With settlement came ownership, defense. Neighbors could be threats. Catalhoyuk's packed homes suggest fear of conflict. Status solidified, inequality grew. Surplus meant storage, storage meant power. Power meant someone had more while others had less. Farming demanded planning, control. Time became a line, not a cycle. Anxiety became chronic. What if the crops fail? The Paleolithic mind danced with the wild's unpredictability. The Neolithic mind tried to outsmart it. Even the sacred changed. Paleolithic art was wild, full of animals, spirits. Neolithic art, like Catalhoyuk's murals, is contained: bull skulls mounted, fertility symbols domesticated. Dense populations bred disease, measles, smallpox, where Paleolithic mobility was a shield. Why settle? Maybe necessity, climate shifts, scarcer game. But Göbekli Tepe suggests the sacred came first, the urge to gather, to ritualize, driving people to stay, to plant, to build. Now let's sit by the fire one last time. The flames are low, the night quiet, the band is close. Children sleeping, elders humming, a dog curled at your feet. The stars are bright, the Milky Way a river of light. This is 10,000 BCE, and time spirals through seasons, stories, migrations. You don't measure life in hours, but in moments. The taste of a root, the warmth of a hand, the story of a hunt. This is the world we've explored, where humans didn't just survive, they belonged. They knew the land like we know our phones, but their knowledge was deeper, woven into their bodies, their voices, their fires. They weren't waiting for civilization, they were already whole. But the Neolithic changed that. Walls, crops, and schedules pulled us from the wild's rhythm. We gained stability but lost intimacy with the earth. Our stress, our cities, our disconnection, they started here. Yet the Paleolithic lives in us. When you crave simplicity, when you feel the pull of a campfire, that's not nostalgia. It's memory, the echo of a time when we were wild, when we were one with the world. So what does it mean to be human, then and now? It's to carry that fire, to remember that we're not separate from the earth, but part of it. It's to tell stories, to share, to belong, not to a city but to each other, to the wild that still calls us home. Thanks for joining me on this journey, wild ones. If this story stirred something in you, drop a comment below. Tell me what part of the Paleolithic speaks to you, or what you'd bring back from that world to ours. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so we can keep exploring the wild together. Stay curious, stay connected, and I'll see you by the fire.